and heavy runway 26, clear for takeoff.
Clear for takeoff, runway 26, heavy lift, you already have it.
Welcome to the Aeropedia Podcast. I'm Ashwin.
And I'm Peter. And today we have the pleasure of being joined by Brian Rynott. Brian is a Senior Vice President of Marketing for the Americas at Altavair. With over 20 years of experience in the airline and aviation industries, including aircraft leasing, finance, advisory, and risk management at Alinda Capital Partners, Alton Aviation Consultancy, Intrepid Aviation, AWAS, American Express, and American Airlines. Brian holds an MBA from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and a Bachelor's of Science from Florida International University, and was recognized in Airline Economics' inaugural 40 Under 40 list back in 2016. So, Ashwin, have you ever searched Google for the definition of a true AvGeek?
I don't think I have, but if I did, would I find a picture of Brian?
I think you will, and our listeners will know why.
Wow, let's get into it then.
Well, thanks for joining us, Brian. It's great to have you on the show. We usually kick things off by letting you give a little bit of an introduction about your background and how you got into aviation.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Peter, very much, and Ashwin for having me. Great to be here with you guys today. And so, I like to say proverbially that I was quite literally born into the industry. So both of my parents spent their entire professional careers working for United Airlines. So I grew up in the airline business, getting, to being able to travel around and using United's past benefits and exploring their network. And I caught the aviation bug, candidly, at a very young age. Loved the industry, loved aircraft. I would perennially, write to airlines at that point, kind of asking for timetables or airplane pictures and other marketing and collateral materials they might have. And on the weekends when my mom would be working at O'Hare, I would beg my dad to drop me off so I could go do airplane spotting and walk around and collect more timetables. So it really drove them crazy, but they're very supportive. And I just loved the industry. I remember when I was, I think in 7th grade, my dad brought home a copy of Air Transport World. And I was mesmerized. This wasn't Airways, or I think at the time it was more like Airliners. Was the hobbyist publication, and I wrote feverishly to the editor and was able to get a subscription to the magazine and really got to learn more about the airline side of the business. And from there, it just continued to blossom all throughout high school. And I guess in high school, I had reached a point where I loved the airline business, had been exposed to it from a really young age, but I also had started to show an interest in the hospitality business, in particular restaurant management. And one thing about growing up in suburban Chicago that I didn't love at the time were the very long and cold winters. Not quite as bad as Montreal, Ashwin, but nonetheless. And so when I went to school, I was like, I've got to go somewhere warm, right? That was my criteria at that point in my life. And moved to Miami, was accepted to Florida International University to their hospitality management school. When I got to Miami, I guess two things. One, they had an excellent hospitality management school, but it was a great place to do aircraft spotting. You saw all kinds of really exotic airlines and airplanes come in at that point. And so it kind of combined two things I love very dearly. When I got to Miami, I wrote a letter to this guy named Bobby Booth, who ran a small aviation consulting and advisory firm called AvMan. They also ran at the time, before the advent of alliances, really, sort of a pan-Latin loyalty program called Latin Pass. And he was like, look, come by our offices, come spend some time with us and, see what you think of the industry and explore it a little bit further. So what sort of started as a open invite ended up being, I guess, a 3-year internship at the end. And I really, really loved the airline business even further in that time. And I had a friend of mine who geared me towards going to American Airlines. He worked at American. American has a management training program that they recruit college undergraduates for. And so I flew out to Dallas and met with them and spent a day with them in their revenue management group, and was fortunate to get a job offer. So after graduation, picked up and moved to Dallas. I spent 4 years with American Airlines in a variety of revenue management positions, starting as a yield analyst covering the UK markets for them, and then ultimately going to American Eagle, doing some domestic pricing strategy and planning. I had a fantastic time at American. What I love about American, particularly coming out of college, is, and probably working in an airline generally, is it really sets you up for how to frame business issues, how to think about complex business problems, the logistics of it, going from something that's quantitative to actually deploying it operationally. And at that point, working for really incredible people and incredible managers, one of the best managers I've ever worked for. I met and had the opportunity to partner with for a year when I was at American. And some of those guys that were a little bit more higher than me at American at the time ended up being in very senior management roles at the airline. So loved American. I started there in the very late 1990s through 2003. In 2003, post 9/11 era, there was a lot of proverbial, industry turbulence going on. And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, also worked at American Airlines. Having seen what was happening, I said, we both can't be tied to the same employer, let alone an airline. And so I started looking for opportunities that were adjacent to the airline business, but not necessarily working for an airline. Had an opportunity to join American Express, a credit card company, moved from Dallas to New York, and Amex had set up a internal strategy risk management group. It was called the Airline Center of Excellence, to really focus on helping airline partners through this time period at that point in time. Meaning not every airline was going to go bankrupt, not every airline was going to go away, but so much of the charge volume of Amex is driven based off of people traveling and flying and getting out on the road. Like, how can Amex be a strategic partner to them? And so I spent 5 years with them, kind of thinking through these various strategies, partnerships. Amex became an actual dip lender to Delta when they were in Chapter 11. So it was a fascinating process, fascinating view of the industry that's close to it, but one step removed from it. And really loved that opportunity. At the end of the day, by then, I was very much an airline guy that was now in a credit card business, and I had an opportunity to get into aircraft leasing with a firm called AWAS. AWAS at the time had just been acquired by Terra Firma, a UK private equity firm from Morgan Stanley. And they had also acquired another aircraft leasing company called Pegasus in San Francisco, and combined them, relocated them from San Francisco. And AWAS had an office both in Seattle and Sydney, moved everything to Dublin. And so we had young kids at the time, packed up New York, moved over to Dublin right at the onset of the global financial crisis, which was a really interesting time to be over in Ireland, and spent 4 years with them in some risk management roles. Again, working very closely with airlines, but providing views to the leasing company about the airline industry, about airline counterparty risk and risk structures, but also mitigants, right? How to be able to do deals while protecting the known risks of doing business with some of the carriers or in some of the jurisdictions that they're in. And so that brings us through 2011, 2012, when I had an opportunity to come back to the United States, join another leasing company that had also been backed by a private equity firm called Intrepid Aviation. Intrepid had been in business for a long time. Before that, it was started by a great guy named Ron Anderson, who was one of the early employees at FedEx and was based in Memphis. And they had taken a forward order on some A330 freighter aircraft. And at the time, the A330 freighter wasn't as broad of a program as it is now. So the private equity sponsor was looking at how can we go from an A330 freighter to positioning these and ultimately leasing these as passenger aircraft. So came back to the U.S., reconstituted helped to reconstitute some of that management team and strategy. We ended up relocating the business from Memphis to Connecticut and Dublin, expanding it. We brought in another private equity sponsor for most of that time that I was there, and spent 6.5 years with them when the private equity sponsors ultimately exited the business. And I joined an advisory firm in New York City called Aviation Consultancy in 2018. And Alton Aviation Consultancy is run by John Mowry and some of the guys that were formerly at ICF. Wonderful team, excellent human beings. Really enjoyed my time there. Got to work on a lot of projects really across the aviation spectrum, but not necessarily all airline related. Do some work related to just industry themes, macro themes, helping firms think about industry opportunities, diligence, and where different investments might sit within the broader spectrum of supply and demand and industry dynamics. So spent some time with them in that, and earlier in their phase, I think when I left Alton, they were around 20 employees, and I think they're 50 plus right now with a pretty broad geographic footprint. Spent a very short period in.
So you had big shoes to fill, is what you're saying.
They got rid of me and they grew. That's how I think about it. No, they're great people, and they've just done a wonderful job of continuing to grow that business even further. Spent a very short period with a small financial firm that I joined just prior to the onset of COVID, originally thinking about some aviation investment opportunities. It expanded into more transportation assets. It really provided a interesting context with COVID as a backdrop about thinking about airplane investment opportunities related to helicopters, shipping containers, kind of you name it, if it was transportation related. And then was able to follow my heart back into aircraft leasing, and a little over 2 years ago, joined with Altavair as their head of marketing covering the North American market. And that's where I am today. And so in my role today, I cover the North American carriers for them. I live in New York. Altavair is based in suburban Seattle and has offices in Dublin, London, and Singapore. We're about a little over 50 professionals worldwide, 150 aircraft under management.
That's amazing background, Brian. Thank you for walking us through that. You've touched a lot of different aspects of aviation in your career, and likely more places to touch again in the future. For those that don't know Altavair's role and response, you said that manage of aircraft. Could you maybe explain a little bit more about what that means and what Altavair does?
Yeah, so Altavair is a commercial aircraft leasing firm. It was started, actually this will be our 21st year in business. It was originally founded as Guggenheim Aviation Partners by a gentleman named Steve Rimmer, Paul Neurick, and some of our senior management team have been there really since day one. And they've partnered with different sources of capital where they go and invest in aircraft. And these, when I say different sources of capital, these are different investors. Right? Presently, our current sponsor is KKR, massive private equity firm. But they've, over their history, be it with Guggenheim or managing investments on behalf of other investment or investors, they acquire aircraft, put them on lease, and manage those leases over their duration, and help investors look to ultimately exit that, be it through selling the aircraft to other leasing companies, selling it back to the airline, or if it's an end of life asset, realizing that value through the part out of the airframe and engines, or help monetize the value embedded within the aircraft. KKR became a sponsor in Altavair in 2018. We acquired initially a very significant portfolio of aircraft from Etihad, their 777-300ER and A330 fleet. Through two different funds to date, KKR has committed over $2 billion in equity to help support the growth of the business, which has seen us go into different asset classes and really expand the customer base worldwide. And as I said, today we're roughly around 150 aircraft with under management.
Oh, that's so cool. And just as you were explaining the entire journey that you've had, I was actually thinking about if I ever Googled the word AvGeek, would your face just show up, right?
I've got it tattooed, Ashwin.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you've done it all. So, as you've done it all, you pretty much could have gotten into so many different roles, right? So what's drawn you towards the aircraft leasing side of things, time and again?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm not sure there's a simple answer. And by far, I have not done it all. I have to say, I have the utmost admiration, particularly for airline employees that go day in and day out, whether they're flying the aircraft, if they're flight attendants. I mentioned both my parents worked at United. My mom spent her entire career at O'Hare in customer service. I mean, those people, they do a phenomenal job for the passengers and for the airlines. And I absolutely also don't want to take anything away from Steve and the team that he's built up at Altavair. I think, what I enjoy most about aircraft leasing is it's almost like the perfect recipe of a chocolate chip cookie, right? It's got like all the ingredients for me. I love airplanes. I love airlines. I really enjoy interacting with people and having conversations and being able to think strategically and tactically. And so it blends all of those elements together as opposed to it necessarily being, one airline or one aircraft type. It's really, kind of a broader portrait, and what brings all those elements together. In an aviation world, I found it's aircraft leasing for me. And that's what I find really compelling about it. Being able to go out and have conversations with airlines and OEMs and financing partners and help them solve problems and discover opportunities related to aircraft.
Is there anything in the experiences you've had working in an airline, working with AMX, and then the consultancies and then leasing, it's one industry, a lot of different roles. Are there cultural differences that you've experienced in the different realms of your career in aviation? Are there different ways of the companies that are all players in this industry that they're a little bit different or unique?
Sure. Yeah, culture it's one of those things that I think you know it when you see it, right? And it's one of those things it takes a lot of effort to define it, to nurture it, but it can easily, evaporate very quickly if things go awry. And there's been elements of culture that I think I've taken from all the different companies I've worked for. When I was starting at American Airlines, it was a very process-driven analytical company, but it had to by nature, right? It is such a big airline. You can't have people going off and being necessarily entrepreneurial, definitely not in an analytics way, and certainly not in an operational way, right? You need those safeguards. And so what you would see at American, I think, at least at that time, what was reflective of that from a cultural perspective. Also, it was a pivot where Bob Crandall had retired, I think, the year before I joined American Airlines. So Don Carty was the new CEO. So it was also evolving very quickly. Don Carty was CEO, and then Gerard Arpey became CEO during my tenure there. So it had gone through a number of changes from a senior management perspective. Equally, American Express is huge, large multinational organization. And you'd have, I think, a lot of parallels between those two organizations relative to aircraft leasing firms, which generally are smaller in scale. Even though they may have tremendous number of aircraft under management, it's not necessarily a people-intensive business, right? Lessors aren't out there proverbially doing maintenance on aircraft, right? Or flying airplanes, or doing the things that really support the actual day-to-day operation. once an airplane is on lease, it's under the care, custody, and control of the airline itself. And so at leasing companies, I think it's a collaborative approach because they generally are smaller teams. You're partnering with, what I like to call deal teams across the organization, whether it's my colleagues in technical, legal, our investments group, or just across the organization more broadly, bringing them together, thinking about opportunities, crystallizing different approaches, and then presenting them to airlines to see if there's a way to bring a path forward on some of these.
One other area, Brian, I wanted to double click on is in general the term risk management, right? You've had several roles in your career where you've been involved in risk analysis and management. So within an aviation context, could you just define what is risk management? How do you go about it in different job functions when you're at a lessor versus when you're at an American Express, for example?
Yeah. No, I think it's fair, and I think Ashwin, you probably think about it the same way if you're at American Express or a leasing company. The execution or the implications might be different. If you think about it like at a credit card company, risk management, you're going to be modeling very largely probability of liquidation of an airline, right? Where an airline may default or seek Chapter 11 or some sort of formal court-appointed restructuring. In a credit card context, you may have refunds that are issued to consumers because an airline might downsize, right? Or it may shed parts of its fleet or restructure. But the real risk is that they shut down because then consumers are going to call the credit card company looking for refunds, right? I bought a ticket on this airline doesn't exist, I want to be refunded my money. And so really when you're looking at it from a risk management angle, it's more around the liquidation at least from a consumer credit card charge point. There's also so much overlap now between credit cards and loyalty programs, right? If you've pre-purchased miles as a credit card company with an airline, that could be a factor in your analysis as well. From a leasing company perspective, you're really looking at, you're going to have a contracted cash flow with that airplane on lease. What's a likelihood or probability of the airline's financial ability to service that payment over a period of time, right? And the airline industry is very dynamic. So it's not like you're always going out solving for 8, 10, or 12-year lease term that the airline's not going to have any issues, right? It's more probably near-term focused based on historical results, but definitely an element of forecasting and some analysis around that. And also looking at it from an asset perspective, right? Does the asset fit the airline? So is this a brand new asset type? Is it consistent with the business plan that they've developed, or is it going off on a completely different tangent? Are they going long haul where it's primarily been a short haul? What's the management's track record and their ability to grow the airline or run the airline profitability, the ownership, labor relations, and jurisdictional risk? All of those are going to have different elements from a marketing perspective, a risk management perspective, a legal perspective, but those are the kind of things that you're going to put together from a macro perspective when you're looking at the risk of a counterparty.
Yeah, very cool. And, it just traces back so much to your experience with American Airlines, I feel, because you were in such critical roles like yield management, where you really have to understand all of the levers that impact yield management, right? And so, did you feel like that initial role and that experience with American Airlines just set the stage for everything else?
I think so. As I said, I was entirely blessed as, growing up with the experience I had at United Airlines, as my parents worked there, and getting really early exposure from a young age and loving it. Like I genuinely enjoyed the airline business. When I was in college, as I said, I did this internship, and these guys were wonderful to me. Bobby Booth, his son at the time, helped run the business, and his daughter-in-law, and having a college kid probably come into a small company in a lot of ways would have been distracting to them, but allowing me to sit in on meetings and read materials and go through models. I mean, it was a fantastic experience. And I think that really crystallized when I joined American Airlines. American, to me, was a true blessing in starting my career, of getting this really incredible overview of how global airlines run. How do you think about a business opportunity? Not even business problem, but a business opportunity. How do you compete from a network perspective, from a service differentiation perspective? The airline industry has changed drastically from the time that I joined American, with alliances. You've got antitrust immunity, you've got different segmentation and products that we didn't have at that time. One thing we did have when I was an American, we rolled out a product called More Room Throughout Coach, right, which was de-densifying the airplanes. This was when United had first started rolling out premium economy. Then we unwound More Room Throughout Coach and added the seats back to the airplanes. We had acquired TWA. American had acquired Business Express, a regional airline, and integrated those. So it's like just going through that process and being able to see the kind of the underwrite case, how it was executed, and ultimately what happened. It was a fascinating opportunity.
So we have listeners, they're probably quite intrigued by the leasing realm, but don't have maybe the background you had, and are curious how they can get into aircraft leasing, if at all. Do you have any advice or recommendations of how someone who's interested in aviation might find a career path that can lead to leasing?
Yeah, this is something I'm really passionate about, and really, again, blessed for that. When I got into leasing, I didn't know how to get into leasing, right? What those real career paths were outside of having worked for a manufacturer, right? That's where I think a lot of people, as kind of a natural career progression for people coming out of McDonnell Douglas, Boeing, or Airbus. Now it's a far more developed industry. It's more mature. There's more opportunities. There's industry associations. The one thing I would point people to, if there's an interest, we have a great industry organization called ISTAT. So if you go to istat.org, it's a non-for-profit. It's an industry association. They have a lot of different resources on their website. They've got a program if you're not in the industry yet, but you're interested as a college student or graduate. It's called ISTAT U. There's courses that are held virtually. So there's professionals worldwide that are part of this. Right now it's hosted through Embry-Riddle University, and it pairs you up with both academia and professionals in the industry. There's also ISTAT PDP, which is a professional development program, again, for young professionals that are already in the industry but want to take their careers to the next level. In Ireland, the UCD in Ireland has a master's program with a specialization in aircraft finance and aircraft leasing. So there's a lot of different opportunities, I think, for the young professionals that are interested in pivoting to leasing or have an interest in it, but not yet sure how to get involved. Those are definitely some ways. I'd say aircraft leasing, it's a global business. A lot of lessors have a very strong presence in Ireland, and that tends to be where some of the more recent opportunity growth has been, but it's a fascinating industry.
Is there anything, that's one thing that's caught my attention, is the focus on Ireland. What is it about Ireland that has created this focus on leasing and that?
Yeah, so the Irish nexus to aircraft leasing is very deep, and it's a very impactful to their economy. I think a lot of it goes back to some of the early days of aircraft leasing. One of the largest lessors at the time was a firm called GPA, just Guinness Peak Aviation. It ultimately ended up becoming what was known as GCAS. And GCAS, the platform and aircraft of GCAS ultimately ended up becoming part of AerCap in the end. with GPA, it was started in Ireland by Tony Ryan. A lot of your listeners probably know his surname from Ryanair. And so he started it. They had a fantastic management team that supported him, that were based in Ireland. And a lot of the outgrowth came from that originally. Ireland as a country has been incredibly supportive of the industry in terms of double taxation treaties, low corporate tax rate, and just building and supporting this infrastructure to develop the industry. In Shannon, there's been a lot of maintenance work and maintenance opportunities on the technical side. There's a strong nexus to London from the legal capital markets as well as New York. And so it's kind of an amalgamation of factors as opposed to one thing. But I think what you've seen overall is unequivocal support from Ireland in helping nurture and grow this industry. And if anybody ever goes over to Dublin in January, there's a big annual conference that kind of kicks off the year for the industry, and it feels like aircraft leasing takes over from that point.
Yeah, they're making a name for themselves with and in very specific areas like whiskey, leasing, things like that, right? So
right.
yeah,
Definitely. Look, the Irish economy has from, call it, the 1970s, 1980s to today, it's completely revolutionized. And hats off to them. As a small island nation, they have done a phenomenal job, be it in aircraft leasing. You've seen a lot of tech companies move into Dublin, pharma. They've really expanded it. And
Ashwin, have you ever leased a keg of Guinness?
no, but maybe there's a business opportunity here where we combine these two, right?
yeah, I'm sure there is. And the Irish are just, they're just wonderful people. There's an Irish economist, David McWilliams. He's got a podcast. He's written a number of books on the evolution of the Irish economy. I think one of the first ones, and that really set the framework for this, is called The Pope's Children. It talks about sort of the pivot of the Irish economy starting in the 70s and 80s through what you're seeing today.
Oh, very cool. And so throughout your career, you've I'm sure faced big challenges and you've solved complex problems. Could you just walk us through some of these and just for our listeners to understand what sort of problems exist within the aircraft leasing or risk management spaces, and then how does one go about solving them?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ashwin, and I think there's a lot of different ways to view business problems professionally. I would probably take a slightly different context of thinking about it. What is an opportunity in a problem? Because there are some problems you will face professionally, be it aircraft leasing or in other industries, that are just not solvable, right? It can be from a regulatory perspective. It can be, legal jurisdictional issues. And those are, hard-nosed irrespective. I think what I like in particular in the North American market is it's a very mature market. You're dealing with largely very big carriers, and they have a lot of different options available to them on how to source aircraft and source financing, right? You've got, United, Boeing's largest customer, with a huge order book. You've got American Airlines, Delta, amongst many, many others, right? And so when you go into them, if you go in with the context of I'm an operating lessor, what do I have to put on operating lease? At that point in time, their interest may not lie in operating leasing aircraft, right? They may be looking at putting aircraft on balance sheet or deleveraging, or airlines that are coming off of tremendous profitability with high cash balances on their balance sheet looking to unencumber, and maybe they're trying to solve for a specific credit rating. So if you end up hitting a path there, okay, operating leasing isn't going to work. Is there an opportunity to do finance leasing, right? Where ultimately that asset will be on their balance sheet, right? If that's important to them. is there an opportunity to support them on their forward orders through what's called PDP or pre-delivery payment financing, right before an airplane delivers? Similarly, depending on how the leasing company is structured and the ability to go into other assets, can you look at leasing engines, right? Are you only looking at narrow body aircraft or a certain segment of aircraft that limits you, but maybe there's an opportunity with other asset types? And so it's having the ability to pivot and also bring the organization along with you in that pivot, making sure you have the support and the buy-in to do that. But being able to think a little bit more creatively with the airlines about how you can achieve ultimately, hopefully, the same goal, but maybe in a slightly different way.
Yeah, and that's a great example. And just to provide our listeners with the magnitude of these pivots, right? Because it impacts not only the airline's business model, but the culture sometimes within the airline, and that determines what fleet types they use, what cost per seat they have, which then impacts the pricing to the end consumer, right? So each of these decisions are big enough in themselves, but then when you multiply that with 10 or 50 or 100 aircrafts, right? That's huge, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities. Obviously, the magnitude of these decisions that airlines are making are big. These are important decisions, right? These are expensive airplanes. And so this is where having really strong relationships with the airlines help. You're spending time with them, you're building relationships. This isn't a transactional relationship, right? These are strategic relationships that you're building truly for the long haul. And helping to nourish and let them know. Sometimes it's better very early on in a transaction to just tell an airline, hey, I don't think my cost of capital or the business is going to be all that excited about a particular asset type. So I'd rather not waste their time in leading them down a path that ultimately we can't execute on. Those are, hard discussions, but they're the right discussions to have, as opposed to putting in the capital both internally and externally to kind of bring something forward that ultimately you might not be able to transact on or let the airline down in the end.
Sorry, Ashwin. Ashwin Airlines is a no-go.
Doomed, yeah. Ashwin Airlines is doomed before it even starts off. Yeah.
No Sukhoi jets, Ashwin.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna transition into our next round, which is a more of a rapid fire round with some qualitative questions.
Sure.
Brian, name one hard skill and one soft skill that you think is critical to succeeding in your role.
Yeah, so let me flip them. So the soft skill, I think, is very much the communication element and really active listening. So a lot of it's just being able to form those relationships, sitting with customers or people and just interacting, but also making sure that you're hearing what they're telling you, either directly or indirectly, being able to read the room, being able to understand the constituents, and really spending time with them to make sure that there is no ambiguity, right, on a situation or on a project. So I think that's really important as a soft skill, being able to develop that, communicate that, and articulate it. A hard skill equally is just the critical thinking element of it. So, I could say being able to use Excel is a hard skill, right? I think that's very important to be able to use it, but I think you've got to be able to think critically about business problems and how to turn them into opportunities or look at them slightly different to execute those opportunities and realize if this is something that's not going to work, then how to pivot and move on to something else. But being able, so that it's not just an order taker kind of transactional situation, but really how are you adding value in these discussions?
Yeah, well said. What's your fondest aviation memory?
Wow. I have a lot of memories, a lot of really, really fun memories. I think, I've had tremendous opportunities and memories in this industry. I remember traveling with my parents. My parents, when I graduated high school, they're like, "You can go anywhere in the world that United flies, and we'll take you on a trip." And being a total AvGeek and loving airplanes, I was like, "Well, we're going to go to Hong Kong." This was when Kai Tak was open. I dragged my dad out to some part of Hong Kong so we could do aircraft spotting. Um, and I remember on the way back, we stopped in Japan, and United had just changed and relaxed its travel policy for employees to allow them to sit in international first class, which before was prohibited. And so we actually ended up getting first class seat assignments on a 747 from like Tokyo to Honolulu. And I distinctively remember that moment when we got those boarding passes. I wanted to get on that airplane and play with the seat and the dining options. It was a great trip.
Wow, so jealous. What part of aviation do you feel is least understood by the general public, and how can they learn more about it?
Yeah, I think in this day and age, there's so much focus on the airlines and the operation, and if things go awry, I think it's easy to take these things for granted, right? An airplane being there on time, catered, fueled, with a crew ready to go. But actually, all these individual parts coming together, it's pretty incredible, right? If you think about it from an airline perspective, and particularly in the US, where you've got these airlines with massive fleets, right? The idea that you've got these aircraft that show up day in and day out, have the maintenance done, have the employees to support them, and these global networks, right? And it's still, to me, it's inspiring, and I love it. Every day I get up and I think about it and see it and experience it. I'm on the road quite a bit. I still think it's something that, yeah, stuff happens, weather happens, crew members get sick, luggage gets lost, but it's still a phenomenal operation and business.
Yeah, agreed. And the last question in this category is, what's your favorite airline, airport, and airplane, and why?
Yeah, so favorite airplane is 747-400. Just a beautiful airplane and machinery, right? Queen of the skies forever. I don't know that I can say I have a favorite airline. Particularly, I cover all the airlines in North America, so they're all great in their own unique way.
Air Choreo, I'm guessing, is your favorite.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
it. That's it,
Yes.
Peter. Jamie Baker, who is the equity analyst for JP Morgan, more than a few years ago, but he actually did one of these AvGeek trips to North Korea and flew on them and came out with a pretty cool trip report on that experience. I did have a really unique experience on Air France in earlier in my career, where for whatever reason international first class was priced equal to business class. I was allowed to fly business class, so I ended up getting this first class experience, and the service was amazing, right? The ground elements of how Air France, everything from like check-in to bringing you through to security to walking you on the airplane and then transferring to Charles de Gaulle Airport. I have to say it's a spectacular product and experience all around. So that would be my most memorable. And from a airport perspective, I would say Singapore.
Nice. Yeah, great choices there. Okay, we're gonna transition to our next category. Peter, what is that category?
All right, Brian, this is your trivia round. So we have 5 questions we will ask you, and I'm realizing now that I may have made them too easy. Normally people are saying they're too hard, but now that we know your background, and I may have made them too easy.
No, that's always a setup. That's it's scary, and I want the L1011-500. That's if Courtney got that.
Courtney, you're not going to live that one down.
Yeah.
L1011, you got to know your history with this one. All right, Brian, are you ready for your round?
Let's do it.
All right. First question. The One World Alliance was founded in 1999, which I'm guessing you're very well aware of now. Can you name the original founding airlines?
Yeah. Okay, so American, British Airways,
Yes.
LATAM. I don't know if they. Is that a yes or is that a
I'm
that
not
a
saying
no?
yes.
Okay, all right. This is Japan Airlines, Cathay Pacific, Qantas.
Some of those, yes.
Yeah? All right. That's what I'm gonna go with. I'm
All right.
all right.
Any other North American carriers you like to go with?
Canadian?
Yes.
Were they? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
All right. You went one over. JAL was a late entrant. So there are 5 founding members. You named them all at some point in that answer. So American,
Good.
Qantas, Cathay, British Airways, and Canadian that now is defunct. It's no longer existing, but it was
Yeah.
one of the founding members. All right. We'll give you 75% on that one.
All right. If I just keep naming the airlines, eventually they should be covered.
Come around.
Yeah.
All right. Question 2. Aircraft spotting. For those listening in, you might want to watch our YouTube version on the Aeroscope Aviation site. But can you identify this aircraft silhouette? Has 4 engines, some winglets there.
Yeah, but that's not an A340. That's
You knew I was going to try to trick you, weren't you?
yeah. It's an Aleutian. But is it the 90s? I'm not great with my my Russian aircraft. Is it the 90s 96?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you got
Okay.
it. You
Okay.
do it.
Okay.
It is the Aleutian 96. So looks very synonymous to an A340. Many of the Aleutians and Antonovs do look very synonymous to other Western aircraft. It happens to be, but yep, the IL-96 has quite a massive main landing gear there too.
Yeah, it does in the center. Yeah.
Yeah. Bogey with 4
Good
wheels.
support for the fuel tanks. Yeah.
These things weren't light. Let's put it that way. All right. Next question.
Yep.
Airlines and aircraft. This is the only airline to take delivery of the 767 with a flight engineer station. So this airline actually operated the 767 with a 3-person crew. Can you name that airline?
Is that United?
It's not.
No, Delta?
It is not.
Oh,
It's not a U.S. carrier.
wow. I'll take a pass then. I get one wrong. Courtney better not get it right.
Ansett Australia.
Okay.
So Boeing actually made a very specific configuration for Ansett because of their pilot contract, is my understanding, that required that they have a flight engineer. And so they actually made it, even though it was designed as a 2-person crewed airplane, they put the flight engineer station in there for Ansett. And later they eliminated it and they overcame that. But they're the only airline.
That had to be an expensive option.
I guess it's so. How would you, from a leasing standpoint, how would you lease an airplane that was the only one of its kind with the flight engineer station?
You try and avoid those, my friend. That's why I said that's an expensive option. That's I don't think an airline would like the economics of that deal.
No. All right. Next question. Airline logos. Can you name the airline that utilizes this logo? It's like a leaf and a bit of a plumeria.
Yeah. Well, this is now you're really upping the ante on me, Peter.
It is a Southeast Asian airline. I'll give a hint.
Like Laotian? Is it?
You got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Lao Airlines.
Lao Airlines, yeah.
Very good guess. So they've got it here on the A320 and their ATRs. I like the livery on that one.
So do I. I was thinking of the ATR when I saw that, but yeah. If only there was like, a professional sport for being an AvGeek, I think this would pay dividends. Not sure how
Be
many.
the World Cup.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you might be our world champion, Brian. We're still trying to find that person, and you're in the running now with three or four of the answers so far. All right. Last question. Airlines. You might know this one too, given your history with United. Can you name one of the two sub-brands, or sometimes in our industry we call it the airline within an airline, that United Airlines has used?
Yeah, well, Ted. That
is one.
That's one. The other one was Shuttle, right? Shuttle by United.
Yes,
yeah.
You did it. Now, if you want extra credit, I'll give you a chance to get your 5th point back.
Yeah.
If you can name the aircraft types that Ted and Shuttle used respectively.
Yeah, well, Ted was the 320, and Shuttle was the 737-300.
Oh,
500.
You shouldn't have clarified. You should have just said 737, Brian.
737 Classic.
I wanted to give it to you.
737 Classic.
It was both of them. Yeah. It was the 500 and the 300.
Okay. Yeah.
But we'll give it to you. Well done. Excellent. Well, thanks for participating. This one was one to educate many, I'm sure. So thank you for participating.
Thanks for having me. It's great on that. I like those pictures you had. That brought back memories. Yeah, no, this was good. And no L1011.
No L1011.
Next time we'll have you back on. And, it'll be a trivia round full of L1011s.
I think maybe what you need to do is like get your past guess, right? And we'll just do like a trivia round.
Oh yeah, that would be a World Cup.
Like a Jeopardy version of AvGeekiness.
Absolutely.
Yeah, who can answer it first?
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah,
maybe that's how we'll determine the finalists. We'll take the 3 top performers throughout the year, and then we'll have an episode with the final round.
And get Garrick to do his live from Atlanta. That's the key.
Yeah, his first time in
first time in Atlanta. We'll get Delta to do some VIP event for him or something.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, Brian, thanks a lot. This has been educational, inspirational. It's been everything that the Aeropedia podcast is all about, right? And I'm sure we've educated the younger generation here and inspired a lot of folks to get into the leasing world. So thanks a lot for your time.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. Great to see you guys and really enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks.
Great.
Thanks for joining us this week. Send us any feedback, trivia ideas, or future topics you may have to our email at aeropedia.podcast@gmail.com. See you on the next leg of our journey.
Bye for now.
Remember to any heavy, contact departure 119.2. Good night.
119.2, speed at 290 heavy. Good night.